Welcome, children, to this lesson on the chapter named Lifespan Development. For your reference, you will find this chapter in your Class 11 Psychology textbook. This chapter is chapter number 4 in your Class 11 textbook. Please read the book after you have finished viewing this video. The second thing I would like to tell you is to please sit with a pen and a paper with you so that you can jot down important points. So, in this lesson, the objectives are 1. To learn the meaning of lifespan development. 2. To understand development, growth and maturation. 3. To learn the meaning of infancy, childhood and adolescence. Now, going to first objective, the meaning of lifespan development, we will be understanding through this lesson what we mean by lifespan and development. We will also learn the meaning of, as given in the objective 2, we'll understand the meaning of growth, maturation and development, and by the end of this lesson you will be able to differentiate between development, growth and maturation. The third objective is to learn the meaning of infancy, childhood and adolescence. So we will understand when we use the word infancy, what is the age range that we are referring to? When we talk about childhood, what is the age range we are referring to? And similarly, what do we mean by adolescence? What is the age range, which is called the adolescent period? Objective number 4 is to understand the determinants of development, wherein we would be understanding what are the factors which contribute to human development. Objective 5 is to understand the importance of lifespan development. Here we'll be understanding what are the contributions of the study of lifespan development to various areas of life. So children, let us start with lifespan development. Now, the word lifespan means the entire span of life of an individual from conception till old age. So when we say lifespan, we mean the period between the conception, when the child is conceived and remains in the womb of the mother, till the child becomes an old-aged person. Coming to lifespan development refers to the study of how organisms grow and change across their lifespan as a result of biological and environmental influences. We know from our understanding of class 11 psychology that environment and heredity both influence an individual to a great extent. So both our genetic makeup and the environment in which we live affect our mental processes, experiences and behavior. So what we call as development is also dependent on both the genetics and environmental factors. The definition of lifespan development and the meaning of development will get clearer as we move further. So coming to the definition of development refers to a pattern of progressive, orderly and predictable changes that begin at conception and continue throughout life. Now, in order to understand this definition, let us break it into parts. As you see in the slide, I have divided the definition into 5 parts. The first part is development is a pattern of changes. What do we mean by this? It means that the changes which happen from conception till old age, these changes follow a certain pattern. So these are not random changes. There is a certain pattern to these changes. 2. Development begins at conception and continues throughout life. So, what we call as development, or what we mean by development, is the pattern of changes which start at conception and they continue till throughout life. So, from the time a baby is conceived till the person breathes his last breath, development goes on. So, development is a pattern of change that goes on since in conception till the last breath. 3. Development is progressive. Now, what do we mean by development is progressive? The word progressive means that the pattern of changes follow a certain direction. So there is always a direction in which changes happen. So by progressive we mean two things. One, there is a direction to the changes which take place from conception till old age. And two, there is a definite relationship between the stages, these changes. Okay? For example, I will give you an example which will clarify it further. For example, a child who has learned to walk first learns how to crawl. Once the child has mastered crawling, can the child stand with support? Once the child has mastered standing with support, will the child be able to stand without support? And once the child is able to stand without support, will the child able to walk? Hence, these 4 stages which I told you, crawling, standing without support, standing with support, and walking, all these 4 stages are related to each other. Each stage has a preceding stage which acts as a building block for the stage. For example, crawling is a building block for standing with support. Standing support is a building block for standing without support. So these stages are related with each other, they are related to each other, and they aid each other. So all the stages, all these changes which happen in the life of a person are related with each other. There is a direction to these changes. This is what we mean by progression. So when we say that development is progressive, 2 things qualify for progressive nature of development. One, there is a direction to the pattern of changes which take place, and 2, there is a relationship between the various changes which take place. Each change leads to the next change. This is what we mean by progressive. Coming to the word orderly. Now, what do we mean by orderly? Orderly means that the changes which happen in the course of development are not random. They are sequential. There is a sequence to it. Only, for example, the example that we considered a little while ago, the child can walk only when the child has mastered standing without support. So there is an order to development. It's not that the child starts to walk first and then crawl. This cannot happen because development is orderly. There is a sequence to it. Coming to the 5th part of the definition, development is predictable. Now, what do we mean by it? Predictability means that the changes due to development are predetermined. There is a certain pattern, a predetermined pattern which these changes follow. So they are predictable because they are predetermined. There is a sequence, there is an orderly fashion in which development takes place. To quickly revise what we have learned about development, we know that development is a pattern of changes. Development begins at conception and continues throughout life. development is progressive, which means that development is one, directional, and two, the various changes share a relationship, a definite relationship with each other. Development is orderly, which means that there is a sequence to developmental changes, and development is predictable, which means that development is predetermined. So now that we have understood what we mean by development, let us go to the definitions of growth and maturation and then compare growth and maturation with development. Let's go to the next slide. So now that we know the meaning of important terms, let us understand what are the determinants of development. So the first determinant of development is heredity. What is heredity? Heredity refers to biological transmission of traits from parents to offsprings. So our genetic makeup has a major influence on our development. The second major influence on development is environment. So what is environment? We all know that environment is the aggregate of external conditions, physical, social and cultural, which influence the functions of the organism. As we all know, environment refers to the three forces acting on the individual which are external to the individual. When we talk about heredity, heredity is something internal, biological to the individual. Now, environment affects the individual at three levels. 1. The physical environment. 2. Social environment. And 3. Cultural environment. So what is this physical environment? We all know that physical environment refers to the physical conditions external to the individual. The area in which you live, the country, the region, the climatic conditions, the amount of pollution that you live in, amount of noise that you live in, all these contribute to physical environmental conditions. Coming to the social environment, what do we mean by social environment? Social environment refers to the factors coming from our social organization or society. In simpler words, how society influences the individual, those are referred to as social environmental factors. And lastly, the cultural environment refers to things like religion, cultural practices such as traditions, cultural traditions, festivals, they all come under cultural influence. So, environment refers to the external conditions which are of three types: 1 physical, 2 social and 3 cultural, and they all affect the individual functioning. So to quickly revise what we have learned, in this slide what we are trying to learn are the determinants of development, or what causes development, what are the major causes for development. So development happens because of two major reasons. One is the biological makeup or the heredity, and two, the environment. And we know that heredity and environment, they both play a role in shaping the development of a person. So till now we have understood the meaning of important terms in this chapter on lifespan development, and we also know what are the major determinants of development. Let us now go to the next slide and learn further. Let us now go to the 3 domains of development. We say 3 domains of development. What do we mean? By 3 domains of development, we mean that development can be categorized into 3 different aspects. So when we talk about development, we are talking about 3 different aspects which develop simultaneously within an individual. The first domain is the physical development. Second domain is cognitive development, and the third domain is socio-emotional development. So by the first domain, the physical development, the domain of physical development, we mean primarily development or changes in the physical form of human beings. This is an aspect of development which is quantifiable, which can be measured. The second aspect of development, or the second domain of development, is the cognitive development. Cognition, we all know, refers to the processes, mental processes involved in knowing about the world around us. So cognition also develops as the baby develops. So physical development and cognitive development go together. Now coming to the third domain, socio-emotional development. This is the area of development or the domain of development which refers to development of the emotional being or the emotional side of human being. So as the baby matures from a newborn baby to a toddler, to a young child, to an adolescent, and so on, there is a change happening in the way the baby or the toddler or the young child relates with the world or connects with the world at an emotional plane. So socio-emotional development basically refers to the relationship that the developing child shares with the world around or with the people around him or her. So when we talk of development, development includes these three domains. Development happens at the level of physical being, at the level of cognitive processes, and also at the level of socio-emotional processes. So they all go together and they all contribute to development of an individual. In the next lessons, we'll be learning how these three domains develop simultaneously in three given stages, which are infancy, childhood, and adolescence. So we'll be looking at each of these stages one by one: infancy, childhood, and adolescence. And for each stage, we'll be looking at all three domains of development. So we'll be learning about how an infant develops physically, cognitively, and socio-emotionally. Similarly, we will be understanding development in all these three domains for adolescence as well as for childhood. In the previous slide, we learned that development has three domains. Now we come to definitions of growth, maturation, and development. Growth refers to increase in the size of body parts or the organism as a whole. It involves quantitative changes and thus can be measured. So growth actually refers to the physical domain of development. When we say growth, we actually mean that aspect of development which is physical in nature. Coming to maturation, maturation refers to genetically determined and naturally unfolding changes largely dictated by the genetic blueprint, which produces commonalities in growth and development. Now, maturation has two aspects. One, the basic thing is that maturation happens because of a genetic imprinting. So there is a genetic makeup which determines maturity. And because of this genetic imprinting, what happens is that members of the same species mature in the same way. So a girl, because of a genetic imprinting, a young girl becomes a young woman because of the genetic imprinting. Similarly, a boy becomes a man because of the genetic imprinting. Similarly, if you look at plants, a pea plant, a fruit of pea plant is bound to become a pea pod. So this is what we mean by maturation. Maturation is genetically predetermined, and it is because of genetic imprinting the members of a species mature in the same way. This is what we mean by maturation. Coming to development, we all know the definition and meaning of development. Now, development has three aspects: development and growth. If we have to compare the concept of development and growth, development has three domains. We know it: the physical, the cognitive, and the socio-emotional. So, development includes growth, or growth is nothing but the physical domain of development, whereas maturation is the commonalities which are produced because of the genetic imprinting of a particular species. It's interesting to note that growth, maturation, and development, all three involve changes. If you look at the slide, changes are underlined in all three concepts because there are bound to be changes in all the three processes, but there are differences in these changes. So all three processes involve changes of some kind or the other. Let us now compare the three and just look at the changes that happen in all the three. Growth refers to changes which happen in the physical domain. Maturation refers to changes which happen because of the genetic imprinting. And development refers to changes which are of three kinds: physical, socio-emotional, and cognitive. So, in a way, maturation refers to the biological part of development. In the previous slides, we talked about determinants of development. So, we know that development happens because of 1. Genetics, and 2. Environment. So, the genetic part of development is what we understand by maturation. So, maturation is that part of development which happens because of the biological imprinting. Growth is that domain of development which is the physical domain, and development in itself is a process that includes changes at three levels: physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional domain, and these changes are progressive, orderly, and predictable. We have already delved deep into the meaning of these terms. Coming to lifespan development refers to the study of how individuals grow and change across their lifespan as a result of biological and environmental influences. So, lifespan development is the study of developmental changes which happen from conception till old age. Lifespan development is also called as developmental psychology. So, the stages of development which we'll be studying in this chapter are 1. Infancy, 2. Childhood, and 3. Adolescence. Infancy is the developmental period extending from birth to 24 months or 2 years. Childhood is the developmental period extending from 2 years to 12 years. And adolescence is the transitional period between childhood and early adulthood. It starts around 11 to 12 years of age and ends at 18 to 20 years of age. So now that we understand what do we mean by lifespan development, and we also know the major terms in this chapter, we have also understood the determinants of development. Let us now ask an important question, which is, why is the study of lifespan development important? Or why do we need to study lifespan development? So in this section, we'll be trying to understand the important contributions of lifespan development to various areas of our life. So lifespan development, the study of lifespan development is important because it has implications, because it serves purpose in various fields of our life. Now the first importance, the first implication or importance of lifespan development is that it satisfies our scientific curiosity. Now, any field which has to develop, or any field of knowledge or subject or discipline develops because of scientific curiosity. So there was an obvious curiosity among professionals working in different areas to know about the course of development. So first and foremost, it satisfies our scientific curiosity of professionals working in different fields. Number two, it informs us about the major milestones or developmental tasks characterizing each stage of development. As we'll go further into the chapter, we'll understand the various stages of development, and each stage is characterized by specific developmental tasks or specific achievements. In simpler words, we can say that at each stage of development, there are certain tasks or accomplishments which a child or an individual makes, which then leads to the child's or individual's transition to the next stage. So when we know about the major milestones or major tasks which are associated with a particular stage, we are able to use this knowledge to improve the lives of children. Now, let us see how do we improve the lives of children using knowledge from lifespan development. So coming to number 3, the field of pediatrics benefits from the knowledge of lifespan development. So we know that pediatricians are doctors working in the medical field, and these are doctors working primarily for children. So they give medical advice to children. Now the knowledge of developmental psychology or lifespan development does inform the pediatricians of the major changes which happen during a certain age and plan their medical intervention accordingly. To give you an example, if a child goes to a pediatrician and the child is not behaving or functioning in ways which are appropriate for the stage in which the child is in, the pediatrician's knowledge of lifespan development or the pediatrician's knowledge of age-related changes and accomplishments will definitely help the pediatrician to diagnose the problem first, and second, to plan effective intervention strategies. So, for example, a child who is not speaking even at the age of 3 or maybe 2.5 will be identified by the pediatrician as lacking behind as compared to children of the same age. The pediatrician thus can guide the parents to go for some intervention such as speech therapy to improve the life of this particular child. Coming to number 4, the field of educational psychology. So we all know what educational psychology is. Educational psychology refers to a field of psychology which uses the knowledge of psychological principles to the field of education. So for educational psychologists, the knowledge of lifespan development enables them to plan effective and age-appropriate curriculum both at the level of school and college. Now going to number 5, the field of special education. We know from our understanding of learning disorders that there are certain children who have special needs or who are different from other children of the same age group. So they have difficulties such as learning difficulties. We all have learned about learning difficulties in class 11 when we did the learning chapter. So problems related to learning are looked at and solved by special educators. So this is a field of psychology which is called special education. Knowledge of lifespan development helps special educators in identification and intervention of appropriate strategies for children with special needs. Now, coming to number 6, in the field of counseling and clinical psychology, the knowledge of lifespan development again helps in devising modules on effective parenting. Psychologists, particularly clinical psychologists and counseling psychologists, use their knowledge of lifespan development to educate parents to apply parenting styles which contribute to maximum development of the child. So our knowledge of lifespan development does inform us to how to go about the best kind of parenting. Now coming to the last point, point number 7, lifespan development also helps us in the area of mental health. So mental health professionals, especially in the area of adolescent mental health, also benefit from the knowledge of lifespan development. What happens is that there are certain stages which are particularly challenging for the individual. For example, adolescence. Adolescence is said to be a challenging phase for both the child and the parent because there are a lot of physical and mental, also emotional changes going on within the child. So this stage, particularly the stage of adolescence, becomes a challenging stage to handle. Now, the knowledge of lifespan development helps mental health professionals in first, one, acknowledging that there are certain challenges associated with adolescence, and two, in devising appropriate intervention strategies to handle the crisis if it arrives. So this is how lifespan development helps professionals in various fields to apply the knowledge for the betterment of children, for the betterment of the lives of children. Through this lesson, we have understood these 5 things. 1. Meaning of lifespan development, meaning of terms such as development, growth and maturation, meaning of infancy, childhood and adolescence, determinants of development, and importance of lifespan development. I hope these terms and all these 5 points are clear to you. Happy learning!